Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our February 2020 J-Teen webinar. Today, we are welcoming Doug Bitonti Stewart, the CEO from the Max M and Marjorie S Fisher Foundation. And as you can see on your screen, he is going to be talking with us today about safety, respect, and equity, with a bit of a focus on Wall Street and Wall Street funders. I was told that we may get to see a beautiful giant golden doodle. So look for the pup as the webinar continues. And without further ado, Doug, the floor is yours.
Erica, thank you very much. So what you're seeing in the background will change during the webinar because I like to keep people interested in what's happening. But I am actually working out of my home office. Every Tuesday, our team works remote from their own homes. So they can either get things done that they need to around the house while they're working, or in many cases, our team does some of their best thinking when they're outside the office. So we all take Tuesday so that we're not missing each other if we all took different days. So today is our Tuesday remote day. So you may see Piper, my 70-pound golden doodle, walk through the screen here from time to time. So, but first, let me just say how grateful I am to be given this chance and to be speaking to you. Jewish teens are extremely important to the family that I work with, and we're proud funders of the Jewish Teen Funders Network, and couldn't be more grateful for their letting us into their work. And I say the same to you today. Erica, remind me, we have less than an hour?
We have, let's talk about 50 minutes-ish, just making sure that we've got time for some questions. And what I didn't say is that if you can go ahead and mute yourself if you haven't done so already. If you want to use the chat box, you're welcome to use the chat box, or you can stick up your hand or unmute yourself. We'll make sure to get any questions or comments throughout the presentation.
Yes, please. So ask questions throughout. So I will take some, some pauses here and there so that you can jump in if you have a question at that moment, or if you sent in a chat question to Erica, that I can make sure that she flags me down for that. Okay. So please feel free to jump in. But here's what I was asked to do, and what I am excited to do over the next 45 minutes or so is sharing a small slice of our story, the family that I work with, so you get some context. And then I'll share a bit of our journey into this work regarding safety, equity, and respect. We came through it in sort of the side door, and so I wanted to share that. And then I'll answer any questions you have along the way. And then at the end, I'll share my gratitude once again for this opportunity. I think professionals who have dedicated their lives to serving teens in our community are the most important asset that we have. Money and foundation and funders are only, money is really inert until a human being actually acts on it. And you've dedicated your careers to this, and I couldn't be more thankful. So does anybody want to accomplish something different today before I go on? Is there something else that you'd like to add to this list? I'm assuming there isn't. Now, you may have questions along the way, but this is your chance. Okay, so in case you chatted in, I'll do my best to cover it. So a little bit about the family that I work for. So this is our mission. And by the way, to lower any anxiety levels that might be rising right now, I have sent all these slides to Erica. She probably has already sent them to you, along with all the safety, respect, and equity standards, so that you'll have everything you need to know. And we're really glad to be partners in this. So I won't be reading slides. That's the short story. But this is the mission of the foundation and the areas that we focus in terms of the Jewish community, for both what it is and what it needs itself, but also for what the Jewish community does outside of itself and how it strengthens other communities. Early childhood, that work for us focuses primarily in Detroit. And arts and culture work is also both in Detroit and in Israel. And we have a body of work in impact investing, which is where safety, respect, and equity came up for us. So the only other thing I would say about our mission and our work is that we do a good deal of work in Israel as well, mostly around youth at risk. And I learned this lesson from one of our partners who said, he corrected me, and he said, the youth are not at risk. The community is at risk because the youth don't have an opportunity to achieve their full potential. I wish I could boil that down into like one little phrase, something quick. So, but it's still called youth at risk in the social services. So this is a portion of a letter that Mr. Fisher sent to his family that was essentially saying, let this work of giving and supporting and working strengthen and bind the family together. So that was a wonderful piece of advice that he gave. If you'd like to learn more about Max Fisher or Marjorie, please go to our website. You'll see a section about us, and there's Mr. Fisher. We have archives, his full archives online, where you can see his speeches to the Jewish Agency back in the 60s and 70s. You can see his notes from when he met with the presidents of the United States as the informal ambassador of the Jewish people, and his role in some of the most critical points in Israel's history and the U.S. history. But he was an extraordinary man. So, and I'm proud to be working through his name and with his family. Mrs. Fisher, so I met Mr. Fisher once, spent 4 minutes with him and had dinner with his driver. That's my story. So there's a longer one connected, but I had 9 years with Marjorie Fisher. And so of the Max M and Marjorie S, I spent 9 years working along at her side and her family's side before she passed in 2016. Mr. Fisher passed in 2005. And so her letter to the family was, you've proven you can do this. So let's keep doing it and let's stay flexible in our approach. Let's just stay flexible and stay together. So this will come up in the how we got into this work. Some stats on the foundation and the family. I won't read these bullets, but I'll tell you that when people ask me, so what are the assets of the foundation? Or they say, well, how big is the foundation? That's usually the questions we get. And I usually go right to the people and say, we've got 53 members of the family in 5 generations. I know what they want to hear is how much money we have, the foundation has, and that the foundation is holding in trust for the community, but that's my answer. But here are the stats for you. Okay. Just to give you a little bit more flavor, I always, this quote from Mr. Fisher, if you are not optimistic, it will never happen. I wish he had said it a different way. It's a little bit of a pessimistic way to say it, but it's more like, if you are optimistic, it will happen, but that's a little too, guaranteed, right? But I love this quote: if you are not optimistic, it will never happen. One of my favorite quotes from Mrs. Fisher is, all giving starts with your heart, and then you use your head. And so you're going to see optimism and head and heart in this story. So I wanted to share those pieces with you. So how did we get here? So as a foundation, and so the foundation was first staffed in 2007. That's when I was welcomed into the work by the family after 20 years of raising money as a development professional, mostly for children's hospitals, and came back to Detroit in 1999. And when the family asked me to be a candidate for this job, I told them that I'd be a bad candidate for this job because partly I don't like the way foundations work. I don't. So if what they wanted to do was create a standard foundation that essentially asks organizations to produce the impact and the outcomes they want, I'm not interested. And I don't know how to do it, and I'm not interested. But if they wanted to create a family foundation that would truly be a family giving together, and would work together to advance the legacy of its founders and its partners, I said, I don't know how to do that either, but I do want to do that. And so as we got started in this work, we were going to a lot of conferences and things, and we ran into a foundation called the F.B. Heron Foundation. And Luther Reagan at the time was their CFO, and he said something that struck a chord with all of us. And he said, foundations should be more than private investment houses that give away 5% every year. So for those of you who know what foundations do, and just really quick for anybody who doesn't. So foundations, we have an asset base, a pool of money that's invested, and each year we are mandated to give at least 5% away. If we don't, Uncle Sam takes it. So we make sure that we give at least 5% out each year. Okay, that's the most simplistic way, but you all know what it is, but just in case somebody listening doesn't know. So what Luther was challenging everybody to think about in 2007 was, should we really just to be investing blindly and just for maximum profit so that we could give away larger and larger 5% every year, essentially being a private investment house that gives away 5%. And we thought, and one of our leaders, Philip Fisher, who is our current chair, he was already in this mindset of saying it's got to be more than grants. So that really got us started on this path. And we went on a learning path and tried to figure out, okay, so now what do we do? Now that we've had this challenge, now that we've had our heartstrings kind of pulled on, we got to be more than that, what do we do? So we thought, and this was our driving mantra, we needed to act our way into this new way of thinking. No level of ongoing thinking was going to change the way we acted on this. There are too many forces inside investments that say, oh, you can't do that. Or convention is you just need to let the folks do what they need to do to make investments work. So don't mess with it. You know, and so there were all these things that we were getting pushback on. And we all thought, okay, we must be in the right spot. If we're getting this kind of pushback, maybe we're really getting to something. So we decided to put a small portion of the asset base aside and start getting into this work. And so, and then the next step we took, so we have about 10 million or so moving in impact investing deals, where essentially we'll either make something as simple as a 0 interest loan. So we made a 0 interest 7-year loan to our local Hebrew Free Loan. The family had already made grants to Hebrew Free Loan, but we made an additional loan. And in the 7 years, they made something in the neighborhood of $550,000 worth of short-term loans to families. And they returned all but $7,500 of that. And essentially, this was over and above the grant making that we were making to the organization. It was a different place where we could put some cash that would do some good instead of sitting in a cash account someplace. So that's just an example. So I'm going to pause just for a quick second to check in with Erica to see if there are any questions so far. There may not be, and I haven't heard anybody trying to jump in, but let me just stop before I go to the next step here.
I think everybody is still all ears.
Okay. Great. So the next step after doing all of that work was we decided that we needed to dig into the larger asset base. So with impact investing, essentially we carved out initially 1.8% to connect with high, and then we decided to go to 3.6. We thought that asking the board for 18% right off the bat would be a tall ask. So that's why we started really small. But it's, you know, at 3.6%, we're talking about $10 million. So it's still a great deal of money. But what we wanted to do was to get to really to the question that Luther Reagan posed to us. And so we had to go onto the asset side and say, okay, what are we doing on the asset side that might be creating or contributing to the problems that we're trying to solve on the grant side? And so we got into this work, and the question is, where do you start? And this is where safety, respect, and equity came in. But we started with one section of our asset base to look and to make sure that we were not involved in human trafficking and child labor. Now, it seems ridiculous, and hopefully someday it will be, that we would even have to ask this question. But finance managers, while they have the ability to understand if you're engaged in a company that uses human trafficking for cheap labor or child labor for cheap labor, yeah, this was one element that the family agreed on that we should learn. Let's see what's in our asset base. Let's eradicate it. Let's figure out what the options are and get out. And so we got to work on that and learning how we would get that done and working with partners and our investment folks. And along this same time, Me Too and Time's Up was happening, and there was a lot of work on both racial equity and also gender equity that was going on the grant making side of our industry. And so we kept eyes on that, but what we were really doing is looking at our asset side. And we started to get some pushback. We started to get some pushback from our peers. We started to get pushback from individual donors who have founded their own foundations. And I'll give you an example. So when I brought up the fact to a group, which I'll let remain nameless, it's a group of folks together. It wasn't one organization, I promise you. And I said, well, hey, I just want to give you an update on what we're doing around human trafficking and child labor and taking that, making sure that we're not investing it in this way. I got a lot of sort of ahs and oohs and some groans and saying, well, you need to let the investment managers do what they need to do. They don't know, exactly what's going on. And, the companies are always changing in their funds and so forth. And so, I think they said, well, this is folly. I don't know why you're doing this. And so we had a very clear answer. And that was, we don't want to do injustice in our asset base while we're trying to promote Tzedakah on our grant side. How can we do that? But there was pushback, like, oh, it's super naive. And again, I guess where I am in my career, I'm starting to wear the naivete as a badge rather than a scarlet letter. So, but we were getting pushback on that. And then when the safety, respect, and equity component, when a coalition started to gather around this work, it was a natural for us to say, hey, we should look at that. So the Safety, Respect, and Equity Coalition was launched primarily by the Schusterman Foundation and Lisa Eisen. And they do tremendous work. They're leaders throughout our sector and well beyond the Jewish sector. And well beyond philanthropy and so forth. And so they had done a lot of research and said, look, this Me Too issue, sexual harassment, gender inequality, and all sorts of things are playing out in the Jewish communal space. It's playing out in Jewish organizations. So let's get our heads wrapped around this. We're not going to be ahead of it, but we need to get on this. And so they created a coalition and created standards and accountability and launched it. And so that was really exciting for us. And so I was at a meeting and I was asked to sign the commitment that we would follow these guidelines, that we would hold our grant partners accountable to these guidelines. And it was sort of it was a really important meeting, and this sheet of paper was going around the room. And each of the executives that was there was signing this piece of paper, that they were going to hold themselves accountable to the standards and that they were going to hold their grant partners accountable to those standards. When it came around to me, now remember, I'm a staff member of a family foundation. I am not a family member. I am a staff member. I happen to be the staff lead, but I don't make the decisions for the foundation. The board does. And we have 4 additional committees. So we have 20 family members engaged in this work to make decisions for us, to set strategy, et cetera. And so at the moment that this was coming around to me, it seemed like the best thing to do maybe would have been to sign it and say, yep, we'll hold ourselves and keep moving. But something hit me, and I realized when I get nervous and start feeling uncomfortable in a place that is really comfortable to me, that I need to listen to my intuition and my, what my gut's telling me. So I said, I can't sign this right now. I can't, and it's not that I won't, I can't. And they were like, well, why not? And I said, well, because we all these standards, and you'll have a copy of those from Erica. we need to update our sexual harassment policy. We need to update our whistleblower policy. We need to do all the things that this is asking us to do. And they're like, well, but this is a prospective commitment, self-accountability and so forth. And I said, I understand that, but I'm sorry, I don't, I'll do it, we'll do it, and then we'll sign this commitment. So there were some objections, just a little bit, and then they said, okay, well, let us know. And so we got our work done to meet these guidelines, and we signed the commitment. The next step was to take this to our grant partners, and to ask them, where are you on these standards, and hold them accountable, and also ask them to hold themselves accountable to meet these standards of training, standards of reporting, standards of employee ongoing training, manager ongoing training, all these standards that are in the PDF. When that was the next step, I thought to myself, if we're going to do this, and we should probably provide the funding to those groups to meet these standards, to simply ask them from a place of privilege and of resources to say, we need you to do this, without providing grants to help support them, seemed, that's not a partner move, that's a policing move. And that's not the way we work. In addition to that, when I started thinking about how our grant partners might receive something like this, I thought to myself, you know what? We met these standards first. And so that was a really good first step. But instead of turning to our for impact partners, I don't like to say nonprofit. I don't think anybody should be defined by what they're not. So if the for-profit industry is defined by what it's for, because it's for profit, and the word profit means progress. And so in the best of all worlds, it's, the for-profit world is trying to create progress and personal resources. And when that's done well, things are great. But why are we defined by not that, right? So we call ourselves for impact. So for profit, for impact. I wish that our whole sector could come up with a new name. And I'm more in love with the idea of a new name than I am the particular one we use. But I decided, instead of going after our for impact partners, that we would go after our for-profit partners first and ask them to meet these standards. And so we partnered with our investment team, and we have 75 fund managers. Now, if any of you are or have been or aspire to be investment professionals, you might say to yourself, 75 fund managers for $300 million seems like a ton of financial managers working on an asset base. And you'd be right. So what we decided, we would go beyond the foundation and actually ask all of the financial managers engaged in all of the family's assets these questions. All of them. So the family has a much larger asset base in total. The foundation is only one part of that. So we went after all 75 managers. So we asked them these questions about the, do they have a policy in place around sexual harassment and respect and equity in their workplace, and how often do they train, and how often do they review the policy, and is it provided to everyone, et cetera, et cetera. We asked them all these questions, not about the companies they invest in. We asked them about their own shops, the people that they employ. And when I brought up this idea to some friends of ours, professional colleagues, I got the same pushback that we got around the human trafficking. And it was good-natured. It was around shared learning. It wasn't, dismissive, but it was like, so you're going to ask financial managers on Wall Street what their policies are in this way, and then you're going to do what? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? We don't really control that side of things. And what we can do is work on our grant side. Let's let the investment professionals do what they need to do. So if somebody said that, how would you respond to that? We need to and let's see if anybody responds in chat or raises their hands. Let's see if we can get some participation. I mean, it's 3 o'clock, 3:30 at least where I am. So I know that in some places it's lunchtime, so I get that. And if you're in Israel, it's nighttime, but let's see if we can get some response. So if somebody said to you, look, we need to let the finance managers do what they're going to do. Let them create the most profit so that we can give away the most money. Even if you agree with that, what would you say? Is anybody responding, Erica?
Not by chat, but if you want to respond, feel free to unmute yourself.
And I'll just wait like 20 seconds. No worries. Nobody has to respond, I promise you, but I'll give you the time.
No, Doug, in our initial conversation when we were talking about this, it was sort of, as you were explaining this part to me, I was also thinking about this question. And, how can we go about doing our programming to serve our constituencies on the backs of people who may be being mistreated or who may be in environments that aren't equitable or safe? And how can we feel good about utilizing that funding for our organizations, knowing or trying not to know where that money is actually coming from?
That's right. Yeah. So there were 2 responses rolling around in my head when that pushback came to me. And one of those is exactly what you said, Erica, right? So how can we allow this, right? And then the second one, I went back to school a handful of years ago and finished a master's degree, an MBA. And then I asked myself, will this harm their performance by asking them? Am I going to hamstring, are we, including our investment committee who agreed that we could send this out to them, including the investment company that we have as a consultant, agreed to do this. Is this going to hurt anything? And the answer in my head was, well, if it does, then we'll work on it from there. I mean, it seems like the question is so important. But if anyone was going to rely on the naivete argument, I was just willing to take it. So, and our investment professionals, yes.
Sorry, I have a quick question, and you may be getting to this later. If you are, don't answer it now.
No worries.
But were you prepared if you saw, I guess 2 questions. One is if you saw data that you were very unhappy with in a particular investment manager with that company, were you prepared to do something about it? And 2, is there any chance that any of these investment managers responded favorably when maybe things weren't as good because they didn't want to lose your business or felt concerned that they might lose you?
Yeah, so a really good question. And we weren't sure what we were going to do with this information. We were not sure. And we had no idea what we were going to see. We did use the same questionnaire, roughly, that the Safety, Respect, and Equity Coalition created for our 4 impact partners. These same elements that are on the screen. And all of these elements relate to the standards. So we didn't know what we were going to find. We didn't know if they were even going to respond. So what we said was, and this is sort of acting our way into a new way of thinking, we said, let's see what we see. Let's see what we see, and then we'll go from there. So I'm just being really honest. We didn't have a, plan B, or not a plan B. We didn't have the second part of the plan. Yeah, no, we didn't. So I'm actually almost done with the story. So we're getting close to where you can share other questions and things like that. But again, jump in anytime. But where are we going from here? Is exactly the question, Erica, that you asked, right? So of the 75 managers, all 75 responded, every single one of them. They are very used to being fired. These financial managers are what we like to call redeemed, right? So, which is funny, but we redeem the money and we move on to a different manager. It happens on a, not a very regular basis, but it does happen. Decisions are made. So out of the 75, 6 didn't have any policies in place at all. 6. And if you look at this chart, only 27 of them meet the manager training frequency that's requested in the standards. And again, I'll reference you to the SRE website as well as the standards that Erica has probably already shared with you. So you can see all of the details on this. But to us, these are the two things that we're now focusing on and saying, because we did have 52 of the 69 actually send us their policy. So that answered a little bit of the question of, are you just saying you have it? Because we said, send it to us. So we've got, 17 or so managers to chase to say, you said yes, but where is it? But to me, that's a little bit lower on the totem pole or lower on the priorities than the 6 that don't have policies at all, that are verifying, saying we don't. I mean, right? 6 of these managers said we don't have one. It's notable to me that during this time that we had this survey out, a sting operation took place in one of the wealthier areas of Florida. And one of the fund managers that is invested in heavily throughout the country, including in the foundation that I work in, the chairman of that fund was swept up in that sting. It was some sort of, it wasn't human trafficking, but it was more a prostitution allegation. I don't know exactly where it is in the courts right now. But to me, that seems like a pretty risk-inducing event for the fund. And in addition to wanting to be good human beings and work in Sadaka-filled, sort of in the true sense of justice and working with people, that there's usually some, when somebody's doing that, maybe the stuff at work is also going sideways. So that happened during this request. And so the two places that we're really focusing on now, and I'm still working with our investment team, and I also want to work in partnership with the Safety, Respect, and Equity Coalition, because we're the only foundation so far that has taken this to their Wall Street managers, is to say, okay, well, now where do we go now? How do we hold them accountable and so forth? And these are the two things we're focusing on in particular, ensuring there's a policy in place and that managers are getting trained more frequently in our effort. But I haven't spent, we're spending more time with the folks at the Safety, Respect, and Equity Coalition. It's now fully staffed, and so we're going to be working with them. So now I'm about to shift gears and sort of near my close. There's still a little bit longer to go here, but not too much longer. So again, if you want to start piling in questions, which there may not be any, but feel free to do that, because what I'm going to touch on next is our evolving approach. So we still have a lot of work to do. I wouldn't have accepted the invitation to speak if somehow we thought we had everything nailed down. And I told Erica that this is a work in progress, but that it's important that as professionals who work inside our community and work with young people in our community, that we need to live our values, whether people are looking or not, whether it reduces profit or not, so that we live we live what we say we believe in. And so what we're looking for here is on the how and the what. The how for us is about shared alignment. We're looking for partners, whether for impact or for profit, that align with us. And if there's a financial manager who doesn't think having a sexual harassment and gender and racial equity policy for their company is important, then they may not be in alignment with us. We're looking for shared learning. With our 4 impact partners, we're not saying we're outsourcing for outcomes. That's exactly the kind of foundation that I would hate working for, and actually, hate's a strong word. I wouldn't work for them. And when I was raising money, I wouldn't want to take their money if all they were doing was outsourcing for impact. So we're learning together. So will the finance managers learn with us if they disagree? And we need shared action. This is the action we're taking. and we're asking them to take this action. Our investment committee now believes that doing this kind of work can actually reduce long-term risk. So if you're a finance professional or an aspiring one, or what do they talk about attorneys? A former or recuperating attorney or whatever. If you're a recuperating finance manager, this is actually reducing risk in the portfolio. So, and we're looking for engagement on this. And so if a finance manager wants to push back, push back. So let's talk about it. Let's engage. We're looking for impact. We want things to change. And hopefully you get a sense of us that in the family that I represent, both as family, as a professional staff, you all as professional partners in the field, and also the neighbors inside all of this, really, which is maybe in your case, Jewish teens or opportunity youth or youth at risk. We're looking for joy inside this work. And I think having to deal with these questions is not joyful, but working on them to get past them and making change does bring joy and energy into the room. It does. So, and what we're looking for is we're going to, as I said, we're going to work in concert with the coalition, leadership, and our peers, so that we're being humble about this. We're not saying, I was really glad again to get this invite, and we were proud to publish the article that we wrote on this to our peers, but we want to work together with them. And we want accountability for positive change, for impact. We want to hold ourselves and our partners accountable for this. Until we get this one worked out, we're not sending this questionnaire out to our grant partners. We need to take another step with our finance managers, so that when a grant partner asks me about my policies, I can tell them that we're up to speed. And I can also tell them that we're asking our friends in Wall Street, the ones that we're working with, to also meet these. And so now I'm asking, what can we do together for you to meet these standards? And more than likely, the foundation that I'm lucky to serve has provided money for capacity building grants to our partners. And so this would, I imagine, once we figure this out, that's what we would do. We would create capacity building grants so that our 4 impact partners can meet these standards as well. So, and I'm really slowing down and starting to wrap up in case you have questions. So this next element, this really is a family that's working together. So we've got 5 generations of the Fisher family. Mr. and Mrs. Fisher are now gone. Their legacy remains. This is a picture of a portion of the family at Ohio State University in front of Fisher Hall. In front of the Fisher Hall is the administrative building for the Max M. Fisher College of Business. And that university, through no support of the family, there's been plenty of support that's gone to the university for the business school, but with support from the provost, recruited a leader for their leadership center that focuses on principle-based leadership. Principle-based leadership. And that's important to us. And so as I finish, what I would tell you is that to end with 2 very quick things from both Mr. and Mrs. Fisher. So Mrs. Fisher once said, she was looking at some thank you notes. She said, she was looking at thank you notes from teens who she had helped through a partnership with a group called Take Stock in Children from Palm Beach, Florida. It's a classic mentoring program, and then as the families come through the program, then they get 4-year scholarships to college if they want them. She had put 36, and yes, that was intentional. 36 young people had funded them through the program, and she was looking through a couple of the thank you notes, and she said these words, which I will never forget. She said, "I will never be able to give enough to make up for how grateful I am that these families have allowed me into their lives." I always repeat that when I share it because it's just so impactful. She said, "I will never be able to give enough to make up for how grateful I am for these families who have allowed me into their lives." And so in foundation work, we're in families' lives. It's a true act of justice, that we work alongside them and not on them. And so doesn't that also need to be the case on our asset side, that we're not doing something to somebody on that side? And for Mr. Fisher, just as a closing story, he once had his grandson, who is in this picture. Let me see if I can pick him out. Where is Tony? Tony's the one on the far right with the glasses. So when that guy, who's in his, like, I think he's in his early 30s now, when he was just a little guy, he went to the Fisher College of Business and was sitting next to his grandfather and asked him a question about something he was hearing. And Mr. Fisher turned to him and said, Tony, there are a couple of lines in business. There is a line where on one side of it is everything that's legal, and on the other side, everything that's illegal. And he said, but the line I want you to focus on is the line where it's the line that's ethical, the line that underscores your integrity. There's a space between that line and the line that's legal. Business schools are going to train you to make money in that gray space. Attorneys are going to tell you, go in there, I'll protect you. He said, never go in there. If you lose your integrity, you lose everything. No amount of money is going to make that back for you. And Tony remembers that story, and so we live by those stories as well. So that's the end of my presentation. So to accomplish my last goal here at 3:46 my time in Detroit, I will end with my gratitude to all of you for the work that you're doing with Jewish teens throughout the country, with the professionals that serve them, and the families that they live in, the communities that they serve. I want to thank Erica for this invitation and to be interested enough to ask us to do this. And I want to thank the team at Safety, Respect, and Equity, and Lisa Eisen for her leadership in this work. And other friends like Darren McKeever at the Davidson Foundation have also been doing a lot of heavy lifting on this. So I want to thank all of them, because I'm really, we're trying to be good followers here. That's what we're trying to do. And so thank you for your time. And it's now just about 3:45 or 3:47 or so. So we've got time for questions if there are some.
I don't want to steal all the questions, but I do have another one. So, especially for those that don't have policies, but even for those whose policies maybe aren't up to date, is part of what you're doing helping them create, update their policies? Like, what role are you playing now once it's identified where they are to get to the next step?
So the answer is, so we haven't done it with our 4 impact partners yet, right? But when we do, that will be, the answer to that question will be, that we'll line up the resources so that they can get where they need and want to go. We'll share this with as less of a you must or you lose, right? And more of a, let's get there together, and what do you need from us to get there? And we'll look for that shared alignment, learning, and shared action. On the Wall Street side, and I had the the chair of our investment committee say to me one time after we left a meeting, she said, "You're really upset, aren't you?" And I said, "No, why is that?" And she said, "Well, you're usually this jovial, et cetera, kind of guy, and you seemed really angry." And I said, "No, what I don't have for these professionals is patience. I don't. They don't have patience for me. They don't have patience for their staff. They're looking for bottom lines, most of them. I'm not saying that they're not good people. I'm just saying that, we use this excuse all the time in finance that, look, I'm too busy. We're trying to make money here, and we have to go. And I just don't have any patience. And no, we will not provide money to a finance manager on Wall Street to meet these objectives. We will hold them accountable to them by working with them and saying, this is, in this next step, for the 6 that don't have them, are you going to get it? Are you going to work on this? Does that increase our risk such that we might need to redeem and move on to a different fund manager? And then for those who have it and then are just sort of phoning it in, what else have they been looking at relative to their own harassment policies and so forth, such that they're protecting the assets that include the human assets that work for them. But we'll have a little bit smaller patients, a lot smaller patients with them.
Thank you.
If they're, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I think we're gonna ask the same questions.
Yep.
Any other questions, comments? Has anyone seen the safety, respect, equity information? I haven't sent it yet, by the way. You may keep checking your email, but don't. I'll send it after this. Or is this something that may be interesting for you all to look into internally within your organizations?
And then I have another suggestion too.
Yeah, go for it. Everyone's very quiet.
Yeah. So again, knowing that that your organization, and I'm glad to be getting to know it and getting to know your leader, Erica, through this process. And it's my fault that I didn't know about your organization before this. So, but let me share that I think that this kind of work with teens, to talk about this with teens, there's this real line, and you probably have seen this more than I have. I have two children. One is 23 and one is almost 21. So I have had teens in my house. But that the for-profit world is one thing and the for-impact world is another. And that somehow all of the brains and really sharp and smart stuff happens in the for-profit world, and they do all this great stuff. And then in the for-impact world, it's social workers, and I know I'm talking to the choir here. But I don't think that teens often see where the impact sector is leading the for-profit sector. And in this impact, in this safety, respect, and equity, that's what's happening here. I'm not saying that there aren't other efforts in the corporate world around this, but what we're saying is that they need to follow on this. We hear a lot where for-profit folks say, well, if there was just the discipline in the social sector, or the, whatever they call it, usually they say not for-profit sector, because they think that's what they're supposed to say. They're like, well, if they could just have more discipline, and if they could just, be able to measure their results. I have a lot of love for these individuals, I do. At the same time, what I'm working on right now is an article to say, actually what we want is the for-profit world to act more like we do in the for-impact space. Understand your full impact. It would be great if we had an accounting department and an impact department that I could ask for quarterly impact reports from, and I could get them at 3:37 or 3:39. I could get them at any time. Push the button and get them, but that's not the way our sector works. So teens need to hear this too, that that we're leading in these spaces, and you're probably doing that a lot. So even just talking about this with teens, I think is super important.
So Doug, a question came up through the chat. Has there been any work looking into the investments themselves? So not just the management companies, but...
So the first step that we've taken is around human trafficking and child labor. And so we're moving into other areas and trying to make sure that throughout our investments, that's not taking place. And the family is beginning the process of identifying what other elements of do no harm does the family agree with and are in alignment with their values. But let me point you to two different groups who are doing a lot of great work on this. So, and they have a funny set of names. One is called GIN and the other one's called Tonic. So GIN is the Global Impact Investing Network. And Tonic, I always forget what it stands for, but Tonic does very similar work, but GIN is doing it on the institutional side where in pension funds are doing this kind of work. And Tonic is where individual donors and investors are doing this work. So we're really following a great deal of what they've done. We're engaged in a couple of other learning collaboratives around this work, because this human trafficking and child labor piece is just our first step in this. It's just a first step in our shared learning kind of approach. So yes, that's where we're going. And the next step with managers around safety, respect, and equity is there's a body of work that you can also learn more about called ESG, Environment, Social, and Governance Investing Protocols, where safety, respect, and equity would fall in is in governance, so that companies are being rated on the way they treat their employees and how they protect them and so forth. And so there are elements inside that work that are also getting to this. And we're looking at an ESG screen across our, how we would do it across all of our assets. So, but I'm being very honest in that we're still taking initial steps and are acting our way into this new way of thinking.
Well, it definitely sounds like this is just the beginning of really many steps into learning more about the world in which all of us associate within and are supported by. So we thank you very much for your commitment. We thank you for allowing us to be, I think you said this is your first webinar, right? That you've given?
For this topic, yeah.
For this topic, okay, great. So thank you for sharing it with us, and we are looking forward to sharing it out with colleagues as well.
Great.
You know, we appreciate the work that you're doing at the foundational level as well.
Well, thanks again for the invitation. Thank you all for this hour that we spent together. And please do me the favor in terms of our shared action. Just one last thing. Talk to those who fund you and ask them about this. The more professionals in the field that ask foundations and donors about how their dollars are invested and what methods they're using to ensure that no one's being harmed or et cetera, the more that we're asked, the better this is going to be, and the faster it'll work. You have a tremendous amount of power, a tremendous amount. So use it, and thank you.
Thank you so much again. Thank you all for joining us this month. And tomorrow is our 1-year anniversary. So look out for or go visit the J-Teen Facebook group tomorrow. I've put together a really snazzy, I think, and informational infographic that gives you some highlights of all that we've accomplished in just the first year. So thank you, Doug. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.